We're good. We're good, Diego.
All righty, let's get started. Let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's get started here from the top. Okay. Well, hello everyone. April, have we've started recording?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So hello everyone, and welcome to this introduction to Adobe After Effects class. I am Diego Delgado. I am a computer science and graphics design major at the University of New Mexico. And I just want to thank REC6 and REC9 for helping me bring this training to you today. If at any point during this class you have any questions, or if you start working in the After Effects environment and maybe you have a question after the class has ended, feel free to reach me at diegodoesgraphics@gmail.com. I will also be providing you guys with a resource list that includes this email. So yeah, feel free to chime in at any point if you have a question. But if I think that your question maybe will take a bit of time to answer, or or like I said, if you come up with a question after the class is ended, feel free to reach me at this contact. Okay, so After Effects. What the heck is Adobe After Effects? So Adobe After Effects is a digital visual effects, motion graphics, and compositing software by Adobe. It's great for keying, tracking, animation, and more. So today we're mainly going to be focusing on using After Effects for motion graphics. And you might have heard me talking about that before the class started. So motion graphics, what are motion graphics? Motion graphics are essentially animated graphic designs. They are graphics that are in motion. I believe this should be playing for you. Can I just get confirmation that this video is working on your ends? Yes, okay, thank you. So this is just a real simple motion graphic that I put together for the purpose of this training. I'm going to be using it in a couple of examples a little bit later on. Motion graphics typically consist of an animated visual, some text, and some audio. By no means do they need to have every single one of those factors, but it's pretty common to have those. Really, the main thing you need is a graphic that's in motion to have a motion graphic. All right, so before we really dive into After Effects, what it is, stuff like that, do we have any questions just before we get started?
No.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, then we can just move right along and go ahead and put questions in the chat if any come up. All right, so there are two softwares by Adobe that I think it can be important to distinguish between the two. And I think it can be important to highlight how they're different and where they shine, because they do have different purposes. And they are After Effects and Premiere Pro. They're both used with video. They both, work in this timeline environment, but they have different purposes. So we're going to get into what they actually are good for and what maybe one is better for than the other. So After Effects. After Effects is better at animation, visual effects, video masking, color correction, and text animations, whereas Premiere Pro is better at video editing, being understandable, because Premiere Pro is just a little bit more intuitive in my opinion. After Effects can get a little bit crazy, especially once you get into more of the advanced settings, but don't let that discourage you or scare you. We're going to be working with some real simple examples today. Premiere Pro is good at rendering quickly, You don't need any kind of third-party software to render. You can make quick edits with it, and you can do simple audio editing in it. It's still not Adobe Audition. Adobe Audition is Adobe's software made specifically for audio editing, but it's pretty good. So the comparison that I like to make is After Effects is like a chisel and Premiere Pro is like a chainsaw. They're both great tools for what they do. Premiere Pro is good at, taking out big chunks and slabbing out big parts of your video project. It's good for big edits. It's good for, assembling a big video project, whereas After Effects is for kind of touching up video and adding effects to your video. So yeah, that's their comparison I would make. Let's just move right along here. Are there any questions between difference on After Effects and Premiere Pro? I would like to add that the presenter view, since the slide is previewing. Okay, I was just told that I am in presenter view. I don't know why that is the case. Let me see if I can figure out why that's happening. All right. It's because I have two displays and I was reading off of the other display. All right. So just before we keep moving, is that better? Is that
Yeah, that took care of it. Thanks.
took care of it? All right. So let me just get my pointer back. All right. So as I was saying, are there any questions before we move along on After Effects, Premiere Pro, what the difference is? Maybe any specific questions for any projects you plan on working on? Which one would be better for which?
Are both of these are part of Adobe Suites, correct? And are you able to kind of move parts of projects back and forth between them and integrate them in a single project?
Yes. So Adobe Premiere and Adobe Premiere Pro and Adobe After Effects are both included in the Adobe Creative Cloud. They're both part of the Adobe Suite. The Adobe Creative Cloud is basically a subscription service that gives you access to all of the Adobe softwares. And yes, they do actually work pretty seamlessly between each other, in my opinion. The cool thing about Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects is that they are non-destructive. So basically, imagine you have this video file on your computer. You can bring those video files into Adobe Premiere or Adobe After Effects, and you can make edits on them, make changes and stuff like that. But the original video file remains completely untouched. So it's really great for making versions of videos and stuff like that, because at the end of the day, you can go back and have your original video file. And yeah, it's really great the way those work. And honestly, not even just the video softwares. Adobe After Effects and Adobe Premiere are great at importing videos, or not videos, still images into your video. Watch, let me go back a couple slides. I do want to point something out here. These shapes in this animation that I showed you before, those are actually Illustrator files that you can just import straight into Adobe After Effects and animate them. There's nothing special about them. They're just shapes from an Illustrator file. So I think that's something cool, and kind of I appreciate when you're working in all the Adobe products, you have access to all of them. You have the Creative Cloud. It just really makes the work go a lot smoother, in my opinion. I hope that answers your question. And if there are any other questions or anything else, I'd be glad to answer that. But if no, then we'll just keep moving right along. Does this work with Gaming Graph? I'm not familiar with Gaming Graph. I can get back to you on that though. If I can get your email, if you can send that, or if I can, or if you email me with that email that I gave you before, I'd be glad to look into that for you. All right, so like I said, if anything else comes up, feel free to chime in. But we'll keep moving along for now. So if you've been in any of these Adobe lessons before, this might be just like a little bit of review. It might be a little bit like I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's very important to learn about file types when you're talking about these Adobe products and exporting and stuff like that. So there are 4 main types. We'll try and keep it simple today. There is an AEP file, an MP4 file, an MOV file, and GIF files. So starting out, we have the AEP file or the .aep file. AEP stands for After Effects Project, or Adobe After Effects Project. They're not compressed, but be careful how you store the linked files. I know that I mess this up all the time. I was talking a little bit earlier about how with After Effects and Premiere and these video softwares for Adobe, you have this video file on your computer, right? And After Effects is basically linking to it, but not actually bringing it in technically. So you can get into some trouble if, say, you have an After Effects file and you have all these video files linked. And then let's say you put your After Effects file on a flash drive and you go and you try and do something with it on another computer. If you didn't also bring those video files over, then those video files are trying, the After Effects file is now trying to access links that are not stored with the file. It's if you don't also copy the video files over when you're copying over the After Effects file, then the link gets broken and you get this big error message on your screen. It's like, well, I don't know what you're trying to point to. So just be careful about doing that. If you want me to go into a little bit more detail on that later, I can.
A quick question,
Yes.
Diego, would you suggest, because I know with working with large video files, your internal storage may be kind of at a premium, and so using kind of a fast external drive is kind of a nice way to save some of the not get into that space on your drive. Would you suggest working internally and then backing up externally, or is it is there kind of like a rule of thumb? Is it better to work completely internally and then export, or is it like okay with this kind of stuff to work externally, or is there kind of too much lag if you kind of work off of an external drive?
So personally, what I would say is that if you do have an external drive and that's something that you have access to and that's something that you can do, personally, what I do is I save everything to just my computer, just my internal drive. And then when I feel like I'm at a good stopping point, I then move it to an external drive. I think that just makes everything easier. You don't necessarily interrupt your workflow like while you're working on it. And you were talking about like the lag. It's not super significant, but I think it just works better with my workflow to just do everything internally and then move it to an external drive. Something I don't necessarily have a ton of experience with, but I know is a thing, is that the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription does come with cloud storage. So if you have fast internet access and maybe like you said, real physical storage is like at a premium, then maybe that's something that you could consider. Or maybe you just want to leave your stuff backing up overnight, or you have plenty of time, you go away for the weekend, you walk away from your project. That's something to consider too. Just remember that if you plan on canceling your cloud subscription to get all of those files, just so you don't have to run into any of the them basically holding your files hostage until you pay for another subscription. Is it possible to embed the video files into an AEP file? So we're kind of going to talk about that a little bit later, because there's like an important distinction to make between like an AEP file, the video that you export, and then also Adobe has these things called libraries that you can make use of if you're trying to keep all of your files and stuff kind of organized and everything's where you expect it to be and stuff like that. So I will be talking about this a little bit later. So yeah, we'll get to that. So where was I? Okay, so something to keep in mind is that if you share this file, if you share an AEP file, and of course the linked videos, people will be able to edit it. So maybe be careful about that. If you just want to show someone a video and you don't want them messing with, you know, all of your visual effects and all your footage and stuff like that, don't share them this file. Share an exported video file, not an AEP file. But also, if you do share this and you want them to make edits on it, they'll need access to After Effects to be able to open and edit it. So keep that in mind. Okay, moving right along, we have the MP4 file. I think that this is probably the most common video file type. Stands for Moving Picture Experts Group. It is unfortunately lossy compression, except for the H.264 and H.265 compression modes. Those are lossless. If that sounds like just a bunch of jargon, don't worry about it. I'm gonna share a little bit more information on compression and what that really means in that resources document that I told you guys I was gonna give you. Just know that basically there's the file type, and then there's how that file is compressed, and it can make a difference. That's all you really need to know. Like I was saying, MP4 refers to the digital container, that container file that wraps around the video, but not the video itself. MP4 is pretty much the international standard. Like I said, it's probably the most common video file type. It's just very, very good. It's a very good video file type. Then we've got the MOV. It's a QuickTime video format. It's the native format for the QuickTime framework of Apple. It's mostly lossless compression. It's a little bit complicated how it actually compresses, but again, you don't need to worry about it. If you really want more information on it, you'll be able to find that information in the document I'm going to provide you with. However, it's proprietary to Apple. So some devices not be able to open it natively. I know that I work on a Windows machine. So let's say I shoot some footage on my iPhone and I want to, you know, open it on my PC, my Windows PC. It won't open it just like natively. You need a third-party software to be able to open it just on your device. However, if you open it directly in After Effects, it'll work just fine. After Effects will open MOV files. It's more like if you want to just watch it, like you want to open your file explorer and open a video file. MOV files will often not work natively on Windows devices. Finally, we have the GIF or GIF file. I've said this before and I'll say it again. GIF or GIF, there is technically a correct version. The G in GIF stands for graphics. So it is technically GIF, but I think that GIF sounds better. I literally just think it sounds better. So I say GIF a lot of the time. I mean, I've heard it both ways. It doesn't really matter. So GIF or GIF stands for Graphics Interchange Format. Cool thing about GIFs or GIFs is that they support transparency. And you'll see that in practice in the example that I'm going to be using today. Compressing with GIFs is complicated because while you may not lose image data, you might lose other factors of the video. So let's say you have a series of still images, you turn that into a GIF, you know, you're not going to have any kind of loss of data really. But now let's say you have a video that's shot in 4K, 120 frames per second, and you turn that into a GIF. Now you're losing video data. It's not going to be as high quality and has high frames and all that as the original video. But for most cases, it's pretty good. It's usually a lot smaller than other video formats, and it's excellent for the web because of that. Things just load faster. You'll notice a lot of web pages, you know, you don't want to embed an MP4 file because they're usually a lot bigger. GIFs are usually a lot smaller, so they load faster on the web page. However, something that's important to remember is that GIFs do not have sound. GIFs have not had sound. They never will have sound. GIFs, it's just not part of the file audio. So yeah, if the audio is very important to your video, then maybe don't go with the GIF format or find some other way to sync audio. Okay, so you heard me saying compression. What is compression? This is just the definition of lossless compression from Wikipedia. Lossless compression is a class of data compression that allows the original data to be perfectly reconstructed from the compressed data with no loss of information. Lossless compression is possible because most real-world data exhibits statistical redundancy. By contrast, lossy compression permits reconstruction only of an approximation of the original data, though usually with greatly improved compression rates and therefore reduced media size. Now, that's basically a really long and fancy way of saying that with lossless compression, it's going to look pretty much exactly like the original file. And with lossy compression, you might see a little bit of a difference. That's pretty much the only difference. I am, again, going to include more information on compression in the resources document that I'm going to give you a little bit later. Okay. So any questions on files or file types?
No, I think it's good.
Alrighty, well then we'll just move right along. So now getting into some stuff that is pretty specific to the video workflow with After Effects and Premiere and those softwares in the Adobe suite. What about MP3? Okay, so MP3, I just got a question that says, what about MP3? MP3 is audio, is used for audio. They're very closely related, but you'd use like an MP3 file if you were, say, working on an audio project, which I'm just gonna say you probably will be doing quite often if you get into, you know, video editing and stuff like that. I know that if I'm making like an animated logo, right? An animated logo with absolutely zero audio can be kind of lame. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just kind of throw together some noises to make it a little bit more interesting. And I'll do that in Adobe Audition, which is Adobe's audio editing software. And I mean, I'm unfortunately not going to be doing a training on Adobe Audition. I think it's probably one of the only Adobe products that I wasn't able to squeeze in to this series on the Adobe suite. But yeah, the MP3 file would be where the file that you mostly work with probably in audio editors like Adobe Audition. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, Adobe Audition's for audio, MP3 is audio. You'd use it if you were trying to, you know, really fine tune your sound or your backtrack, or you're making a song or whatever, a jingle for your motion graphic, or your video in general. you know, this is probably a good time to just touch on this real quick. Cool thing you can do in Adobe Audition, and you can do a little bit in Premiere Pro. I know this isn't a training on those, but I think it's worth mentioning, is I'm not going to be covering it today, but there's plenty of guides online. It just helps if you know that you can take out background audio in those softwares. If you know you have a fan running or your refrigerator makes a weird sound or something like that while you're recording your audio, a lot of times you can go in and just isolate maybe your voiceover or something like that, and make your audio track a lot smoother. Just worth mentioning. Okay, so moving on, we'll be talking about keyframing. What is keyframing? So a keyframe is essentially the start or end point of an action. It's often represented as a dot on the timeline. So in this example here, you can see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks down. You have 2 dots, and that represents a span where an action is taking place. We'll talk more about keyframing when we actually open up the software. And, you know, it'll just probably be a little bit more understandable that way. But I did want to talk about it, make you start thinking about, you know, marking the start of an action and the end of an action, and how that might look when you're editing something. Okay, now it's kind of some of the fun stuff. We'll be talking about the principles of animation. So principles of animation, what are they? Principles of animation are based on the methods of Disney animators from the 1930s to present. They started, you know, the Disney animators, they started making this like these guidelines for making good animation in the 1930s, and they've kind of been, you know, used in the industry for a long time, and we continue using today. So these are the 12 principles of animation: squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, straight ahead action, and pose to pose action, or pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, ease in, ease out, arcs, secondary action, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. Now you'll see I have some of these highlighted because unfortunately, I don't think I have enough time to go over all of them today. But the ones that I have highlighted, I will be talking about specifically because I think that they apply a lot to motion graphics, and more specifically, the motion graphics we're going to be working with today. However, real quick side note on straight ahead action and pose to pose action. Basically, there's 2 major ways to animate something. You can, you know, go through frame by frame and draw every single frame, create every single frame, or you can do what's called pose to pose. And After Effects, with the use of keyframing, is pose to pose. Basically, that means you have the start of an action and the end of an action. I was talking about that in terms of keyframing. And basically, the computer says, okay, so if you're here and you want to get here, then I'm going to make up what the middle looks like. You just need to give me the start point and the end point. So keyframing uses pose to pose. So After Effects uses pose to pose. Okay. So staging. What is staging? Staging refers to where the camera is positioned in reference to your subject. In conventional videography, this might be referred to as framing. So in this example, I have my little motion graphic, and you'll see it's at the top left of this white box. So that's the staging of this motion graphic. I put the subject in the top left. Now, does this look good? Not really, but I'm just showing you that if you can imagine your frame as your camera, where you put your subject is the staging of that subject, you know? All right, so moving on, we have follow through and overlapping actions. So in real life, moving objects have physics. Follow through refers to an object remaining in motion even after the process of stopping has started. So, you know, things don't actually stop instantly. You know, it's like if you're in motion and you decide, okay, I want to come to a stop now, you don't just stop immediately. So that's what follow through is. It takes just a little bit of time. And you'll see this example that I gave with motion graphic, I'm using as an example. I drew a middle point, just a red line down the center. Now, eventually, all those shapes come to a stop and at rest in the middle, but they do overshoot the middle for just a second and they kind of wobble back into place, right? So that's what follow through is. Overlapping action refers to how different things may respond to physics differently depending on their physical properties. For example, hair will respond differently to a sudden stop than the rest of your body. So now imagine you're driving in a car, you slam on the brakes, right? And you have long flowing hair. Your hair might fly forward and into your face, but maybe your hips don't move quite much, right? So overlapping action refers to like multiple actions all happening at the same time and all of them behaving a little bit differently. I hope that makes sense. So now this one's really important for making organic and smooth looking animations, ease in and ease out, also occasionally referred to as slow in and slow out. In the real world, objects do not keep a constant speed. They need time to speed up and they need time to slow down. So in this example I give here, you've got the top triangle. It's moving in a straight line, left to right, constant speed. The triangle on the bottom takes a second to get going, and then it's really fast in the middle, and then it takes a little bit of time to slow down again. And that's ease in and ease out. It's just to make your animations look a little bit more organic. Yeah. So moving on, we have the concept of arcs. So in real life, things very rarely move in a perfectly straight line. Arcs are a more natural pattern for movement. If things move too straight, they might look unnatural or erratic. So in this example, you'll see that when I have these triangles flying into frame, they don't just go perfectly right to left, left to right. They have this little curve to them. And that might not seem significant, but I do think you see the difference when you have something moving just with a little bit of a curve versus just a straight line. Okay, so that's arcs. Now the last one we're going to be talking about is appeal. What is appeal? It's literally how appealing it is. Does it look good? Does it have pizzazz? Is it appealing? Is it visually appealing? So on the left, I have an example of this animation with some video effects. You've got kind of a neon kind of glow, maybe a little bit of transparency in the shapes. I have that kind of glitched, maybe VHS looking wobbliness to the graphics. The text, same thing. It's kind of shaky. And then at the very end, it glitches out and it collapses. That's a lot of effects. And for some, it might be too many. It might seem like too much is going on at the same time, might be a little bit confusing, hard to follow. And on the right, you have minimal effects. I have almost no effects on that example. It's just graphics in motion. That's pretty much all it is. Another effect on the left side is that I gave it kind of that bulging effect, that rounded effect to make it look a little bit like it's on an older screen maybe. But yeah, on the right side, it's just colorful shapes moving into position and then text coming in on the bottom. So yeah, just think about how visually appealing your video projects are, some effects that you can add, color correction, stuff like that. Okay. Are there any questions on the principles of animation, or more specifically, any of the principles that we covered? Those effects are really cool. Thank you. I'm going to give you a little bit of a pro strat a little bit later on how to get some really nice smooth animations and video effects and stuff like that in AfterEffects. I was going to say something about these. So, oh yeah, okay. So if you are interested on learning a little bit more on the principles of animation and getting really smooth motion graphics, again, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of information at the end of this lecture. Just give you, it's straight from Adobe. It'll just give you a little bit more context, a little bit more explanation, and some examples on the principles of animation and how you can apply them for motion graphics. Okay, so moving on, we have aspect ratios and resolution. Again, if you are in last month's class on Premiere Pro, you might remember this aspect ratio. An image aspect ratio refers to an image's relationship between width and height. Some examples include 1.85 by 1, 2.39 by 1, 4 by 3, 16 by 9, 3 by 2, and 1 by 1. So you'll see that 1.85 to 1 and 2.39 to 1 are mostly used in film, like physical film, like there's a roll of film in your camera. And the others are more common in digital, with 16 by 9 being the most common. You'll see 1 to 1 really common on social media. I'm pretty sure Instagram probably is the main one that has just a perfectly square media size. That's another thing I'll be linking is just a guide on social media aspect ratios. So maybe you're making a social media specific video, you want to spruce up your Instagram post, you want to make the colors pop, something like that in After Effects. I have a guide on aspect ratios, so you make sure you set up your document specifically for that. Yeah. So top two are film, 16 by 9 is the most common, and 1 to 1 is a perfect square. All right, so now we have resolution. Resolution describes an image's level of detail. Resolution is very closely related to aspect ratio. Some examples include standard definition. It's not so standard anymore because resolutions have just gotten insane in the past 20 years or so. So that standard resolution, that's 640 by 480p. So that's 4 by 3. High definition or HD, that's 1280 by 720. 16 by 9, again, that's the aspect ratio that we're going to see a lot of. Full HD or FHD, 1920 by 1080. Full HD is where I think most people work the most. I think it's just really common. You got Quad HD, which is just a little bit better. 2K video. Now we're starting to get into, you know, those big numbers, those serious numbers, which is 2048 by 1080. This is a slightly different aspect ratio. It's 1.77 by 1. You've got 4K video, sometimes referred to as Ultra HD or UHD. It's 3840 by 2160. That has a 1 to 1.9 aspect ratio. And then finally, the probably the biggest one anyone would realistically be working with, 8K video, usually sometimes referred to as full Ultra HD, 7680 by 4329, which is once again a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Okay, are there any questions on anything that we covered in the last several slides, aspect ratios, resolutions? I'll walk you through what those really mean when you're setting up your document, when we actually set up a document, which we'll be doing in a couple minutes here. But are there any questions before we move along? All right, if we're all good, then we'll just keep going. And again, feel free to chime in if anything comes up. So we're closing up here. Don't worry, we're going to get into the fun stuff now. I just want to make sure you're feeling confident on everything that we've covered. Maybe you came up with a question, but then you know, we moved on. Maybe you put it in your back pocket. Consider your understanding of the following things: After Effects versus Premiere Pro, file types as they apply to After Effects. What does keyframing mean? The principles of animation, more specifically the ones we covered, and aspect ratios and resolution. If we're all feeling confident on that, we can move right along. Yeah? No questions? All right. Well then, let's just get started, shall we? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing real quick because I want to give you guys that document that I was talking about a second ago. Let me just go grab the link and I'll just put it right in the chat. And something that I highly encourage you guys to do when you get this is everyone in the meeting. Here you go. So go ahead and open that document up that I just sent. Something that I encourage you guys to do is go in and take a look at the compare FPS link after this session. I didn't talk too much about FPS and what it really means in this lesson, but that's a really great visual representation of FPS. We might come back to it a little bit later if we have time during the lesson, but I found that that simulation just doesn't communicate super well through Zoom. It's better if you actually just go in there and play with it. But I might walk you through how to actually use it if we have a little bit of time at the end of this session. All right. Well, if you guys are going to, if anyone's going to follow along with me today, I recommend that you go ahead and start up After Effects. I'm going to open it myself and I'll start sharing again once my app is done launching. It's After Effects, and honestly, a lot of the products in the Adobe suite, they're pretty beefy softwares. They're really powerful. And so they might just take a little bit of time to start up. That's okay. If at any point you need me to slow down, please feel free to just say something, chime in. It's really not a big deal. If you need me to slow down or re-explain something, please just, I'd rather you just say something and we'll get you sorted out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again and you will see what you should be seeing when you start After Effects. With the exception that if this is the first time you're starting After Effects, you might see like some pop-ups like trying to tell you like, oh, do you want to see a walkthrough? Do you want a guide or something like that? You might see some of that. Just go ahead and close those. We're not worried about those for now. So if you're following along, what you do want to do is go to the new project section, this blue button in the top left. Click on that. And you'll get this screen. Now, from here, you have two options. You can make a blank composition. You can make just a completely blank video file that you can just edit from scratch, add things as you want, bring things into your content editor, stuff like that. Or you can make a new composition from footage, where basically this means you go onto your desktop and you select a video file to start editing right away. So because we're just going to be going through some of the basic tools for the next 15 minutes, we're just going to make a new composition from scratch. So go ahead and click on New Composition. You'll get this pop-up window right here. Go ahead and name it whatever you want. I'm going to name mine just Test. You have a bunch of presets that you can use. They're those things I was talking about. I was talking about them earlier. You've got HD, UHD, social media portrait, landscape, and you've got different frames per second, different resolutions, all that stuff. But because I want you guys to get comfortable with the concept of width, height, resolution, frames per second, stuff like that, we're going to go ahead and click on Custom in this section that says Preset. Click on Custom, and then you've got two dimensions, width and height, and this is measured in pixels. I'm going to make mine a square, but you know what? I'm going to make mine 1080 by 1080. Oh, okay. You know, that's okay. I accidentally pressed enter. Don't press enter like me. But if you did, that's okay, because you can go over here where it says composition and you can click on composition settings and you just get that tab right back. So I'm just going to type in 1080 right there. And I have my settings back. So now let's make sure that our pixel aspect ratio is set to square pixels. And let's make our frame rate 30 frames per second. That's pretty good, 30 frames per second. If you're doing something very high speed, you might want 60 frames per second. But like I said, that virtual simulator for frames per second is really good at really figuring out what the difference is between having a high FPS and a low FPS. You might already have a little experience with that. But yeah, I think 30 frames per second is good for now. Now, here is something that I think is really important to take a look at. The start time code and the duration. Now, when I was learning these softwares for the first time, I know I messed this up a lot. Basically, I would make this video project, but my video, it was just a real short little animation. So it would be like maybe 10 seconds long, but I would set my duration to be like a minute. And then when I would export it, I would get my little 10-second animation, but then I'd have, another 50 seconds of complete dead space, dead air, just a black screen. I was like, why is it exporting an extra 50 seconds? It's because I set up my duration to be 60 seconds. So you can always open up this composition settings menu again. But when you're setting it up, try and pick a duration that is appropriate for the video project that you're working on. So yeah, I'll leave it at 10 seconds for now. I think that's good just for our purposes today. But duration refers to just how long your video is and how big your or how long your timeline is going to be. And yeah, I want the start of the time to be at 0.0000000. I don't want it starting at a weird time like 5 seconds in or anything like that. Okay, so if we're all good there, go ahead and click OK, and you will get a black box. Your timeline. Over here in your project panel, you can drag in content, stuff like that. Yeah, and this is where we want to be. You'll notice that at the top right, you might have these tabs that say default, review, learn, small screen, standard, and libraries. Those are basically just different views for you to use. I think I use the standard and default view the most. And honestly, when I'm working in my own workflow, a really cool thing you can do is you can completely customize the windows that you have open at any given time. But that's a little bit more advanced. Once you start working with the software, you'll know what tabs you use often, which ones you don't really need. So yeah, just for now, we're going to be staying in this default view. And before we move any further, I just want to make sure that if you are following along, that you're good and you don't want me to re-explain or say anything or touch on something anymore. All right. All right, no problem. If you have to run, that's perfectly okay. I hope you were able to get something out of this. All right. Well, if there are no questions, then we can just keep going. One of the main things I like to break down just as an introduction to a new software is the tools panel, because it's where most of us start actually working when we're making a new document, a fresh document. So tools panel is up here, top left along the top. You see that? You've got a pointer, a hand, a magnifying glass, a little circle arrow. These arrows going in different directions, shapes, and so on. So the very first one we're going to be talking about is the pointer, and it's a pointer. You use it to click on things and select things. It's probably the main tool you're going to be using from this panel. And actually, you know what? Before we get too far, before we get too ahead of ourselves, I want to add something to my project called a layer. Right now, my content is completely empty. There is nothing there. It might look like a black box, but it's just nothing. There's absolutely nothing there. So I'm going to actually add a layer that means something to my panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the top where you see file, edit, composition, layer effects, and so on. I'm going to click on layer. I'm going to click on new, and then I'm going to click on solid. And I'm going to call it background. And I'm going to make the color like a magenta-y kind of color, because why not? I just think it's really visible. Yeah, like a magenta-ish color, and then click OK. All right, so now I actually have a solid layer in my content panel. So now we're actually going to be able to see stuff on it, stuff like that. Okay, so now we're going to go, we're actually going to skip all these tools just so that I can put something on top of my layers. I'm going to add a rectangle. And the rectangle tool is very similar to rectangle tools in other softwares like Word and PowerPoint and stuff like that. Very similar stuff. So I'm going to click on my rectangle tool, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag a rectangle out. And now there's a shape in my workspace. All right, cool. And you'll notice that if you click and hold on the rectangle tool, you will get options for the rectangle tool. You can make a rectangle with rounded edges. You can make an ellipse. You can make a polygon, and you can make a star. Something that I think is worth noting about all of these shapes is that under normal circumstances, oops, let me change the fill real quick just so that you can see this a little bit better. So under normal circumstances, when you click and drag, you will make a completely free-form size shape. But if you hold the shift key on your keyboard while you're dragging out a shape, it'll lock the width and height. So if I don't hold the shift key, I'll make a completely free-form shape. It can have whatever width and height I want. But if I hold the shift key, it'll have equal width and equal height. So that's just something that I think is worth noting. All right, but I actually don't want a circle, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And keyboard commands, you don't have to use them or anything like that, but important ones to know are Control Z undoes, and Control, let me just double check I know what I'm doing. Control Z undoes, and Control Shift Z redoes. So drag it out, Control Z takes it away, Control Shift Z brings it back. Okay, so now we've got this this shape, and if you still have a rectangle, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. We're just getting used to the controls. So the hand tool. What is the hand tool? Use the hand tool to navigate your workspace. We're not actually moving things around. We are moving what you can imagine as the camera around. So this might not seem incredibly useful, but if you're working really up close, let's say we're really close up in here and we're working on really fine details, and you can zoom in by scrolling, by the way. Also, we'll move on to the zoom tool in just a second. But if you're working on really fine details, really close up, you might need to move just little bits at a time, very close up. But when you're about like right here, it doesn't matter that much, I don't think. Okay, so moving on, if you maybe don't have a scroll wheel or scrolling on a trackpad's a little bit difficult, you got just a tool designated to zooming. By default, it zooms in. You'll see a little plus mark in the middle of the magnifying glass. Click, you'll zoom in. Click, you'll zoom in. If you hold Shift while you have, or not Shift, Alt, I'm sorry. If you hold Alt while you have the magnifying tool out and click, you'll zoom out. And you'll see the little cursor will change from a magnifying glass with a plus and a magnifying glass with a minus sign. So I'm just gonna recenter this in my window. Okay, so that's the pointer, the hand, the magnifying glass. Moving on, we've got the rotation tool. Now, this is going to be kind of hard to see on a circle now that I think about it. Rotation tool does exactly what it sounds like. If you have an object selected in your window and you click with the zoom tool, you can rotate it. All right, now I do want to cover the next tool because I think it'll make it a little bit more visual. This is the pan behind or anchor point tool. So if you look closely, you'll see that at the center of your shape, there's this like little crosshair looking thing, okay? So that is basically what we call the origin or the anchor point of your shape. And you can use this tool to change where that anchor point is. Now, the anchor point is the point on your shape where things rotate from, scale from, stuff like that. So it'll change how the shape behaves if you change where the anchor point is. So if we click and drag on this little crosshair, and let's move it all the way to like a corner or something crazy, right? Now that is the center. That's what the shape is considering the center of its transformation. So now let's go back to the rotation tool. And if we go to rotate, now it's rotating around that point. Okay. It's not rotating around the middle anymore. It's rotating around that crosshair. And so you can do that to make some really unique animations and spinning effects and stuff like that. And it's really neat and it's really useful, especially when we start adding keyframes. So let me reset that. We already went over the shape tool. Then we've got the pen tool. Pen tool is very similar to how the pen tool operates in apps like Photoshop. If you have no experience with that, that's fine. Just know, click again to make a straight line, click again to make a straight line. And it'll slowly fill itself into a shape. If you have a fill set, I'm going to undo that because that's for straight lines. If you don't want a straight line, let's say you have a curve, then when you click, instead of letting go right away, drag out and you'll get these little handles. And now you have a curved line and you can control it using these handles. And if you let go, you can always go back and grab the handles again and change your shape. All right, I'm going to get rid of that. So that's the pen tool. Then we've got the old reliable type tool, very similar to the type tools in other products and probably softwares that are outside of the Adobe suite entirely. Word, PowerPoint, stuff like that. Click to make a little text box. You can start typing and you add text. And you can animate text, which is cool in Adobe After Effects. So that's the type tool. We also have, if you click and hold, you'll get the option for the vertical type tool. Same exact deal, except you type in a straight line from top to bottom. That's the only difference. All right, then we've got the brush tool. Now the brush tool is basically the exact same brush tool as Adobe Photoshop's brush tool. So what we're going to do to actually use the brush tool is we're going to go back to the pointer and we're going to make sure we have our shape where we want it so that we can make it very visible. Go to the brush tool, then we're going to double click on the background. Now that's something important to remember. The brush tool is a little bit weird. You'd think you could just grab it and you could just start going with it, but you can't, which is unfortunate. The brush tool only works on layers. So you need to make sure that if you're planning to use the brush tool on something, that it is in fact a layer and you're in the layer view. You can enter the layer view by double clicking on a layer. So right now I have the background layer. I double clicked on that with the brush tool. And now I'm looking at just that layer. And then I can use the brush normally on that layer. So yeah, it's a little bit silly. It's a little unintuitive, but that is how it is. And we've got the clone stamp tool. Again, clone stamp tool is very similar to the clone stamp tool in Photoshop. If you don't have experience with that, that's fine. But clone stamp tool is like the brush tool in that you have to work on a layer. So double click on this and you know what, let me add another layer just so that we can actually see what the clone stamp tool does. I'm going to go to layer, new, solid. I'm going to make it half the size here. So 540, make it a different color. Nice cyan, just because again, highly visible. Okay, so now we've got another layer in there. I'm going to go to the clone stamp tool. I'm going to double click on that. And now you'll see this little crosshair. That is what my reference point is. That is what the clone stamp tool is going to use to decide what it's going to be copying. Actually, let me go to a different layer. Yeah, okay. So You can alt click to pick a different reference point, and it'll change what part of the image that your clone stamp tool is referencing. For the clone stamp, when you're ready to use the clone stamp tool, okay, it's going to basically take what you've selected as your reference point, and then you can then draw with that, if that makes sense. So let me see if I can actually get it to work here. I know that we're about out of time, and I kind of want to get into the others. Okay, I'll come back to that if we have time, but I think the most important thing right now to cover is the eraser tool. Eraser tool is just like the other eraser tools and other softwares. It takes away stuff. It erases parts of your environment. You'll see it looks like I'm painting black, but I'm not. That's actually the void showing through this magenta layer. That is nothing. So like, let's say I want to do that. Like a cool effect that you might want to do is like, let's say you take away strips, you erase strips. What that's going to do is if you export this as a video file type that supports transparency, that's the void. So you'll just see through it. You'll go straight through it. This will be opaque, but the black parts will not be. It'll be completely transparent if you support it, or if your file type supports transparency. Okay, so that's not black paint. That is the void. We've got the rotor brush tool. That's a little bit more advanced, so we're just not going to talk about it. And then we've got the puppet position tool. This, I really wish I could go into more detail about it because it's just a really fun tool, but it's a little bit more advanced. I highly recommend that you take a look at it. If you have, personal time, it's a really neat tool. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with it in terms of animation. Okay, well, unfortunately, it is 11:04, and I think we're supposed to stop at 11. So we can come back, and if you sign up for the afternoon session, we'll go into a little bit more detail with some of these tools, and we'll actually start animating some motion graphics. I hope that you got something out of this training, and I hope that you can join us this afternoon. I'd be happy to take any questions before we go, but if not, hope to see you this afternoon.
Thanks, Diego. Looking forward to seeing the animation this afternoon.
Hope to see you there, or be happy to see you there.